Okay, so I've been dabbling on and off with game dev for a while now. I love the idea of creating games, and with my background in software development, it always felt doable. The problem was, every time I started, I'd get overhyped by an idea, scope creep would soon kick in and kill off any aspirations I had for finishing a game. This would demotivate me, and it'd always feel like an impossible task to actually finish something. I was trying to learn game development by setting myself a big project. I think can be okay, but at the start it's definitely beneficial to follow a process end to end. There's a lot of value to be had in actually completing something. In life, one way I make myself productive is by completing lots of small tasks. I use the completion of each small task as a snowball of motivation to attack the bigger tasks. For me, this was tried and proven, so I thought I'd take this approach with game dev. Doing this would allow me to build up a library of assets that I can reuse in future projects, as well as learning a lot about the game development process end to end. I like this concept, so I got to work. So the first thing I needed was an idea. The first thing that came to mind was a take on a classic space shooter type game. I wanted it to be 3D, as I like the idea of just using cubes as characters. I thought it'd be simple to implement without being an artist, and I felt that this style of game leaves a lot to the imagination, which kind of makes simplicity a feature. Once I'd decided this, I had a lot of things pop into my head, so I went straight to Trello to organise the impending chaos in my brain. With the board created, I jumped right into Unity. Okay, hardest part over, time to get to work. So the first thing I did was implement the ground in the player. The idea was that this cube was some kind of ship floating through space, and you were some kind of droid trying to protect your ship from incoming enemies. Yeah, like on Star Wars. I implemented some basic movement using the keyboard, and then got to work on trying to spice up the scene so it actually felt like he was floating through space. I started with a skybox. I went to the Unity asset store and found this awesome free skybox. I added it to my scene and quickly had something that looked kind of space-like. It looked a bit static though, so I added a one-liner to a script to make it rotate, giving the illusion that you're some ship spiraling through space. Happy with the background, I moved on to the actual game content. I started by looking at the enemy AI. I added in a basic enemy, which was just another cube. I then looked at how to make this enemy fire projectiles. There was some trial and error here, but in the end I ended up with this. With the enemy AI implemented, I now needed to work on the main mechanic. That was how the player would actually fight the enemies. My initial thought was to try something different from a classic space shooter and make it so that you had a shield to deflect projectiles rather than actually shooting at them. I implemented this and it felt quite fun, but it was also a bit limiting and sometimes felt a bit slow paced, but still I pursued this. With the basic fight mechanic implemented, I moved on to adding more game content. I found some free cube particle effects on the asset store which I really liked, so I added these into my project. This was actually my first time dealing with particle effects. I found it fairly straightforward after watching a tutorial, but I did have some issues with the sizing of the particles, but my good friend Google soon came through here, and in a short space of time, the game felt a lot more complete. With the particle effects added, I worked on making these instantiate programmatically when collision events occur. Now I had basic working mechanics in the game and some basic content, I had to actually figure out the direction for the game. I had to add some kind of end goal that you could play towards. I didn't really know what this would be at this point, so I went away and had a bit of a think. I think this is where one of the key arts of indie game design comes into play. See, I didn't want to spend ages developing tailored scenes. I didn't feel it was necessary here with this type of game, but I did want there to be as much playable content with minimal development effort required. The goal here was to finish the game, and I didn't want to introduce scope creep. I quickly decided a minimalistic wave system would work best here, one where there would be an infinite number of waves that would grow in difficulty and use 3 basic types of enemies, so I got to work on that. I worked for a while on designing an algorithm that would increment the enemies in the wave gradually. The challenge here was balancing it so that it didn't feel boringly slow but also not impossibly fast. To help design this, I created a console app and scripted the algorithm out so that I could visualize it before implementing it into Uni. Here I used letters to represent small, medium and large enemies. In Unity, these would be replaced with the spawning of the corresponding prefabs. After playing around with this for some time, I integrated it into my game, and this was the result. So now I had my wave system, it was time to actually design some decent-ish looking prefabs for the characters. I created a prefab for the small, medium and large enemies and added them into the game. It was nowhere near perfect, but I was kind of happy with them for this game. I didn't feel they had to be greatly detailed. I then added in the first bit of UI text for the wave text. This was fiddly at first, having not worked with the canvas in Unity, but once I got to grips with the concept, it was pretty easy to use. My game was progressing quite nicely at this point, but I had some code that had gotten quite messy as I wanted to implement quite a lot of things fast so I could see them in practice before spending ages trying to make the implementation perfect. So I had a fair bit of refactoring to go back and do. I just wanted to clean up the game before going through and actually adding finishing touches to the actual game content. I also realised that I hadn't been updating my Trello board, which was probably why my brain felt so fried, so I went back and did that before carrying on with anything else. Now I needed to add some kind of UI text to the game. I'd been putting this off for some time as it didn't excite me as much as actually adding the other areas of content, but it turned out to be quite enjoyable. I added some really rough text at this point as the game wasn't finished and I didn't really know where to put it on the screen yet, so I thought I'd revisit this once the level design was complete. Now at this point I wanted to add some story to what was currently a pointless cube floating endlessly through space, so I gave it some thought. One thing that came to mind that was you was on some ship that was orbiting a nearby star. This was mostly just because I wanted to add in planets and I thought adding other planets would be quite complex, but if I added a star I could just make it bright orange and add light to it and it would look quite realistic. So I added that in. I then added some ships in the background to give the illusion that there were multiple ships orbiting this star. Kind of took inspiration from the concept of Dyson Swarm here. I watched a YouTube video about those once and found them really interesting. It's a bit random, I know, but it was the only thing I could think of at this point. I didn't want to spend loads of more time thinking about this, so I just cracked on with that. Now at this point I needed to go in and add some menus to the game, so I created a main menu and I also created a game over menu so that you could restart and play the game end to end. The game felt really complete at this point, but there were still some missing details I wanted to add. I wanted to add a bit more depth to the level design, so I added in the concept of ships flying past in the distance. And I also playtested the game for a while at this point, but it felt way too difficult. It also felt a bit one-dimensional in terms of gameplay, so to counter this, I added the concept of characters having different weapons. I also added a secondary ability for the player so that you could switch between different abilities. You could now fire cubes that would heal the defense point, which kind of made the game a bit easier, and you could also get to some higher waves and enjoy a bit more content. And it also added a whole new layer to the game, and I thought it made it really enjoyable. I also added health bars at this point because they were missing. For this I found a really nice free asset on the asset store which quickly enabled me to add the health bar for the player and also for the defense point. I also made it so that when the game over screen was shown, any enemies in view would fly off into the distance rather than just disappear or stay still. I felt this made the game feel really polished at this point and I quite liked the effect. Now all I felt was left at this point was to add some audio into the game. I had added a sound effect earlier on in development using BFXR, but I didn't actually record this. But using that tool I was quickly able to create something that sounded somewhat decent. If I was to actually go and launch this game, I'd probably spend a lot more time on sound effects, but I'm not planning on doing anything with this game. It's more just a personal project, so I felt that was sufficient. And then with that done, I set about finding some background music. For this, I just went onto the asset store and downloaded some free music I found. It was space themed and it sounded kind of on point, so I added this in and felt that it really worked. So I went with that and this was the result. Funnily enough for me, the end result was actually something I enjoyed playing. I played it for a while and the highest wave I got to was actually wave 20. I found it is quite difficult and it can be actually quite addictive. It actually puts a smile on my face to actually enjoy playing something I created. I didn't expect that to be the case. I thought if I was to create something I'd probably find it boring by the end of it because I'd be really fed up with the content, having to go through it over and over again. But I found that I actually enjoyed it and finishing it was a really proud moment for me. It's the first game in Unity that I have gone end to end with, so yeah, the only thing left to do would be to launch it, so maybe I will upload it to itch.io, but I haven't decided yet. I've learned a lot from doing this game, but the main thing that stands out is just how quickly you can actually put something together in Unity. The asset store is fantastic, there's so many great free assets on there and that really helped with this game. Going forward, I do intend to do more of the artwork and model creation myself, but for the sake of this video and for this game, I felt that just using the asset store was all I really needed. And I also didn't really have time to go and learn all of the artwork and modeling. I've done a bit of that before, but nowhere near enough to do it any justice, and I didn't want to spend ages on this game, I just wanted to get something done. So I completed the goal of finishing a simple game. Now it's time to do the next one. I really enjoyed doing this. Recording this video about the development is something different that I'm not used to, so I hope it was insightful, I hope it was enjoyable. If you have enjoyed it, I do intend to try and make more like this, so please do give it a like and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate that. And yeah, if you want to see any future game dev videos, keep an eye on my channel, and thank you for watching. I really appreciate it.